some sounds, they don't need to be loud to stay with you. Sometimes they just settle in. Where are you tonight? And what time is it where you are? Leave it in the comments. Just remember this moment. You'll want to know exactly where you were when it began. It had begun with a hound named Luma. She had once barked at every passing bicycle, every delivery truck, every bird that lingered too long near the window. Then she had stopped. She had been seen curled in the far corner of her owner's garden, staring blankly at the wooden fence. No tail wag, no sound. She had ignored food, ignored calls. Then one morning, Luma had vanished. No broken gate, no paw prints in the mud, only a shallow impression in the grass where she had last been seen, and a few strands of dark fur caught in the fence slats, twisted unnaturally. Her owners had searched, flyers had been printed, offers of reward had been posted online, but Luma had never returned. Then the others had started to go. At first it had been slow, a terrier here, a shepherd there, all seemingly unconnected. But as the weeks had passed, the pattern had grown. It had not mattered the breed, the age, the health. Some had vanished from behind locked doors. Some had gone while owners had blinked. Others had been found pacing corners, eyes glassy and distant, only to disappear days later. And always there had been signs, scratches on the limbs, thin, clean cuts on the neck, never deep, but always fresh. Theories had emerged. Wild animals, coyotes, a cult. Some believed the animals had simply run, some migration of the instinctual impossible to understand. Others spoke of illness, hallucinations, a parasite perhaps, but no bodies had been found, no carcasses, no leashes left behind. Only silence, and eyes that watched fences at night. Among the cautious had been a woman named Elena. Her companion was a rust-colored retriever named Mocha. He had followed her through university, through moves, through years of solitude and struggle. Mocha had been the heartbeat in her quiet home. He had waited at the door each day. He had rested his head on her lap during storms. And now he had become a source of fear. Elena had not let him out unsupervised. She had installed a new lock on the gate. She had paid for a smart collar, one that tracked motion and sent real-time alerts. No walks off-leash, no time alone in the yard. Every precaution had been taken. But one evening, just past dusk, Mocha had vanished. The back door had been left open for air. Only for a moment. Elena had been called away by an urgent work message. A few minutes, no more. When she had returned, silence. The backyard had stood still, the grass unmoved, the windless sky painted in dull gray. Mocha had not responded to her call. The fence had been checked. No breach, no trail, only a single droplet of blood atop the wooden slat near the rear corner. Bright, wet, fresh. No sounds had been heard. No bark, no struggle. The world had simply blinked, and he had gone. Her hands had fumbled to open the tracking app. The paw icon had still been visible, still moving. Elena had driven without blinking, without breath, through streets that blurred into shades of wrong. The marker had moved east, out of the neighborhood, beyond the industrial park, and into a wooded strip of land between abandoned rail lines. Then stillness. The marker had stopped. No signal loss, no stutter, just a sudden end. Elena had followed it on foot, stumbling between chain-link fences and overgrown yards. No signs, no people, only thickets and fog. And at the edge, a clearing, a narrow path into the trees. And there, in the grass, Mocha's collar, torn, drenched in thick saliva, bent metal tag still attached, still warm. She had collapsed to her knees, The collar clutched to her chest. The world had gone quiet, too quiet. The insects had not sung. The trees had not moved. The sun had faded behind a wall of clouds, and the forest had waited, breathing slowly, patiently. Elena had not returned home. Not that night. Not while the collar had remained warm in her hands. A call had been made. No words had been processed. Only panic. Ross had arrived shortly after. He had found her kneeling near the animal trail, her face hollowed by grief. He had not spoken at first, only waited beside her in the gathering dark. And when she had looked up, the tears had not yet come, because something inside her had refused to believe it. Not yet, not here. Ross had examined the trail, and what had been found had not belonged to Mocha alone. Other collars, older, faded, twisted, each one torn at the same point, clean across the center. Each one still bearing names long forgotten in the neighborhood. One had been blue and muddy, another pink and almost white with age. One tag had read Bixby, another Luna. All familiar, all gone. The trail had been marked with flattened grass, but no paw prints, no drag marks, only the stillness of the trees and the growing hum in the back of the skull. Ross had urged retreat. The hour had grown too deep, and something in the trees had watched. No eyes had been seen, but the gaze had been felt, like the world had leaned slightly forward to listen. So they had returned, together, in silence, and the forest had remained behind, but not forgotten. The house had felt wrong that night. Every sound had echoed. The doors had creaked more than they should have. The lights had flickered too easily. Ross had stayed on the couch. Elena had sat near the back door, unable to close it fully. Something had been expected. Not hope, not rescue, just presence. A paw against the glass, a whimper, a breath. None had come, only the slow passage of the night, and the certainty that something had changed permanently. In the morning the world had not welcomed them. The air had been thicker. The sun had seemed weaker. The birds had not sung. Even the passing cars had felt quieter. A neighbor had waved, but no words had been exchanged. And when asked about Mocha, the expression had flickered. Not sympathy, not interest, just confusion. As if the name had meant nothing, or had meant something unpleasant. As if it should not be spoken. By midday Ross and Elena had returned to the tree line. The same man had seen them pass. He had mentioned the missing pets in passing, like a bad weather report. Shrugged, moved on. Permission had been granted again, with a nervous laugh, and a warning about heat and ticks. Nothing serious, nothing real. The forest had accepted them reluctantly. Branches had scraped skin. Thorns had tugged at pant legs. The air had tasted metallic. Yet the trail had remained, not wide, but definite, more so than before, as if carved by something deliberate. Not natural erosion, not animal habit. A tunnel of branches had been formed ahead, filtering the light, shaping the world into a green-lit hallway. And beyond it, stillness. A clearing. Massive oaks had loomed, their limbs stretched like skeletal arms to form a dome. The forest had opened like a cathedral, and silence had deepened. Even the breath had felt heavier here. Ross had drawn his blade then, not for the trees, but for what had moved just beyond the light. The smell had come next. Slowly, insidiously, the scent of decay, thick, rotting, familiar, and yet amplified, like death left out under glass. Elena had moved forward, pulled by dread, drawn by hope, both burning through her chest like coals. And there in the center of the clearing, it had been found. Not a dog, not Mocha, a deer, or what had once been one, laid open, hollowed, bite marks layered in chaotic rings, small and large, teeth marks of predators and scavengers alike, ribs cracked wide, organs spilled like wet leaves. The flies had not buzzed. They had waited, feeding quietly, methodically, as if even they had known this place was different. Ross had examined the wounds. His face had paled. Too many mouths, too clean a kill, and too little evidence of struggle. The earth had not been disturbed, as if the deer had waited. Elena had scanned the tree line, and what she had seen had not been expected. Eyes not glowing, not bright, just there, staring. Dozens. Shapes emerged, all breeds, all sizes, even species once considered wild. Foxes, coyotes, but most had been dogs. Clean, still, silent. A corgi had stepped forward, matted, dirty, but unmistakable, and behind her, a flash of white fur, curled ears, dark eyes. Mocha, alive, unharmed, but wrong. Posture rigid, movement measured, emotion absent, recognition uncertain. And then he had stepped forward, not toward her, but at her. The line had begun to close. The clearing had become a trap. The forest had drawn breath and exhaled them into the circle. The pack had moved forward, slowly, without sound, without chaos, like a machine built of instinct. Mocha had led, but not as he had once walked. There had been no tail wag, no tilt of the head, only forward momentum. A hunger, wrapped in memory. Ross had moved first. His body had placed itself between Elena and the circle. The machete had been raised, not as a weapon, but as a promise. The animals had responded, not with retreat, but with formation. A semicircle had been formed, backs arched, snarls low and rhythmic, like a chant carried by breathless throats. And then Mocha had lunged. Not barked, not warned, just moved. Teeth had caught skin, flesh had torn. Ross had kicked, the blade had swung. Mocha had fallen, but only for a moment. Blood had been left behind. Elena's, not deep, but intimate. She had screamed. The scream had broken the silence. The forest had answered. The pack had surged. Ross had shouted for her to climb. The tree had been close, the branches low, the bark firm. She had obeyed. Her hands had scraped, nails had cracked, thorns had scratched, but the tree had accepted her, and Ross had followed, or tried to. The ascent had failed. The weight of fear had pulled him down. The blade had been lost. The hands had clung, but not for long. Two animals had struck, one at each leg. Teeth had buried themselves deep. Ross had cried out. Elena had reached, grasped fabric, tried to lift, but the limbs had buckled, and the forest had claimed him. He had fallen, with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. Then, the feeding, the breaking, the tearing. The body had not resisted long. The screams had bent into wet gasps, then into twitching limbs, then into nothing. The pack had worked together, a system, a purpose, like something older had been remembered. Mocha had gone for the face, slowly, lovingly, each strip of flesh removed with care. No anger, only ritual. The others had followed suit. No one had fought for dominance. No snapping, no growling, only consumption, piece by piece, until Ross had no longer resembled Ross, only an echo, a pile, a husk. From above, Elena had watched. Her throat had torn from screaming. Her eyes had burned. She had begged creatures who no longer spoke that language. Branches had been broken and thrown. Cries had been hurled like stones, all ignored, until finally, stillness had returned. The pack had turned, their muzzles red, their eyes bright. Each one had looked up, together, unblinking, patient. They had waited, sniffed the air. Then they had left, not scattered, not hidden, just dissolved into the forest. one after the other, until only Elena had remained, and Ross, or what had once been him. Hours had passed, sunlight had shifted, heat had pressed from all sides. Elena had not moved, not until the shadows had lengthened, not until her limbs had trembled from thirst and stillness. Descent had been slow. Each creak of the branch had felt like betrayal. The ground had felt wrong, too soft, too warm, too familiar. She had approached the remains, fallen to her knees, and sobbed, not loudly, not dramatically, just endlessly. One hand had hovered, never touched. The fear of contact had overpowered the need to say goodbye. Ross had been erased. The trail back had stretched. Every sound had become threat, every twig a trigger, every whisper of wind a possible breath. Elena had walked the path of the dead, but she had walked it alone. The green wall had appeared, brighter now, closer. Through its gaps, safety had glinted, but safety had lied. The pack had not fully vanished. Two had remained, not the leaders, just watchers. A collie, a mutt with wiry fur and blank eyes, both blood-soaked, both quiet. Their approach had been slow, their growls low. The intent had been clear. The chase had begun. The pain had struck before the scream. The jaw had clamped around her wrist. Teeth had punctured flesh. Bone had been scraped. Her body had twisted away. The scream had shattered the tension of the woods. The second animal had circled, slow and deliberate. A hesitation had saved her, a moment of confusion in the pack's rhythm. She had used it. Her hand had found the collie's tongue. Fingers had sunk into the wet, pulsating flesh. The grip had tightened. The tongue had been torn. A yelp high and human-like had burst into the clearing. The two had stumbled, had backed away. Blood had pooled beneath their paws. The eye contact had broken. The forest had blinked, and Elena had run. The green wall had shredded her skin. Thorns had lashed her arms. Vines had clung to her legs, but her feet had not stopped. The clearing had been left behind. The trees had parted, and the world had returned. Bright, vibrant, fake. The road had been crossed. Voices had shouted. A man in a bathrobe had seen her collapse on the pavement. Sirens had arrived. Hands had lifted her. Flashing lights had replaced the sun. Questions had been asked. None had been answered. Not really. The days that followed had passed in stillness. Bandages had been changed. Statements taken. Elena had spoken of teeth, of betrayal, of Mocha. The names had been recorded. The notes had been filed, but no clear picture had emerged. Only trauma, only confusion. Searches had been conducted. Ross's body had been found, partially. What had remained had required dental records. The machete had been found first, bent, stained, buried beneath gnawed earth. 8 dogs had been killed in the woods, each one feral, each one collared. Not all had been identified, not all could be. Mocha had not been among them. That fact had been noted, then quietly forgotten. Too complicated, too strange. Weeks had passed. Elena had stayed inside, curtains drawn, phone off. Her arm had healed mostly, but the bite marks had remained visible, even when covered, even in the dark. They had throbbed when the house had been too quiet. They had pulsed when laughter had tried to return. And then, the sightings, small things, shadows behind fences, eyes at window height, a flicker of white fur beyond the hedges. No one else had seen them, only her, and yet, they had never vanished completely. Some nights scratching had been heard, not at the door, not at the walls, from inside, small, rhythmic, like claws tapping wood. The scent had returned as well, faint, rotting, familiar. She had told herself it was memory. That trauma had rewired her perception, that it had all been in the mind. But one morning the back gate had been open, just slightly, and paw prints had been left in the soil. leading toward the house, not away. On a Sunday, Elena had seen Mocha again, not running, not playing, just sitting at the far end of the garden. His fur had been damp with something dark. His head had tilted at an unnatural angle, and his eyes had looked through her, not at her, through her, as if she were already fading. He had not barked. He had not wagged. He had waited, and then walked away, disappearing behind the trees once more. She had wept, not because she had seen him, but because she had understood. The transformation had begun in silence. Her appetite had faded. Her interest in company had withered. The world had grown quieter yet clearer. She had felt them, always near, behind hedges, under porches, inside mirrors, calling her, not with words, not even with sound, but with belonging, the call of the pack, the urge to return, to run, to shed the skin of memory, and be new. She had not resisted, not completely, only long enough to write, only long enough to tell you, whoever you are. Reading this, doubting it, rationalizing it, it's fine. Skepticism is a comfort, one you'll soon outgrow, because they don't just take the loyal ones, not anymore. They take those who grieve, who remember too clearly, who feel too deeply, because those emotions call louder than any whistle, and when the time comes, you'll see them too, waiting, behind the fence, in the space between your eyes and sleep, calling, smiling, inviting. The first letter had been discovered on a Wednesday, a thin, off-white envelope. No stamp, no address, no handwriting on the front, only a smear, as though someone had touched it with a trembling thumb. It had been found on the kitchen counter, precisely aligned with the tile grout. Finn had lived alone. He had always lived alone, and his apartment had been sealed like a tomb. Windows double locked, doors bolted with chain and latch, security habits honed through years of solitude. The envelope had been opened with curiosity first, not fear. Inside, a single folded page, red ink, not quite blood-toned, but too thick to be marker. The message had been brief. You blinked 41 times in 5 minutes. You look nervous. Were you? The handwriting had been uneven, shaky, as if written during a seizure or under duress. Finn had smiled, thin, mechanical, the kind of reaction someone forces when trying not to show discomfort. The paper had been burned in the kitchen sink. The smoke had stung his eyes, but the scent had lingered, sweet, faintly floral. The next envelope had been placed on the nightstand. No signs of entry had been found. No camera footage had captured a visitor. Nothing had triggered the hallway motion sensor. The note had said, "You breathe unevenly. When you sleep, you talk in whispers. Were you dreaming of fire again?" That night, Finn had not slept, only sat in bed, knees pulled to his chest, clutching a kitchen knife, not out of bravery, out of pure blind confusion. No one had known about the dream, not even him, not fully. Only fragments had been remembered. Flickering light, heat across the back, the sound of crying in a voice that matched his own. He had begun to question memory itself. By the 4th day, the apartment had been stripped of comfort. Blinds had been replaced with blackout curtains. Mirrors had been removed, towels stuffed into window frames. Every crevice sealed, but the letters continued, always placed with unnatural precision. On the fridge, inside shoes, beneath the toothbrush, each one a mirror, each one a taunt. You hum in C minor when you brush your teeth. Your left hand trembled this morning. Is it guilt or fear? You read the same sentence 8 times before turning the page. Beautiful. Finn had stopped answering calls, stopped opening emails. The world outside had become an echo. Only the apartment had remained real. Real in the way a cage becomes real when one forgets freedom. Then had come the photo. Not a letter, something new. A Polaroid, left atop the pillow. The image had shown Finn, asleep, lying on his side, one hand clutching the edge of the sheet. The angle had been impossible. Taken from within the room, above the bed, directly over his face. His mouth had been slightly open. A single hair on his chin had curled upward in static. Across the bottom, written in the same thick red, "I don't need the window anymore. I'm already inside." To next morning, Finn had left. No suitcase, no goodbye, only a single plastic grocery bag. He had driven without direction, crossed state lines without noticing, and now, the motel room had become a coffin. Wood paneling, warped by time, curtains yellowed by decades of smoke, a silence too complete. He had bolted the door, stuffed towels under the frame, covered the peephole with adhesive tape. No one had been told where he was. No digital trail had been left. The burner phone had no contacts, no location services, only darkness and the sound of his own breath. Until the knock, 3 soft taps, then silence, then a whisper through the paper-thin door. You blinked 40 times in 5 minutes again. The door had not been opened. No response had been made. No breath had dared to exit. Finn had remained still, an object frozen by fear. The whisper had not returned, nor the knock. Only the echo of his pulse had remained, thrumming against the inside of his skull. He had waited 15 minutes, then 20, an hour. Only after time had blurred did his muscles begin to release their grip. No footsteps had been heard walking away. No car had started. Only stillness, uncompromising, complete. When courage had returned, the door had been approached, slowly, with the knife clutched in hand. The peephole had remained covered. A towel had blocked the crack beneath. One eye had leaned toward the curtain seam. Nothing had been seen outside. No shape, no shadow, no wind, just the parking lot, lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb that had hummed in bursts. The decision to move rooms had not been made out of logic, only instinct. The front desk clerk had not asked questions, just handed over a key to room 12. 2 buildings over, another crumbling space, another bed with a concave center, another place to not sleep. This time the window had been sealed with duct tape, the TV unplugged, the lamp unplugged, the bathroom light had been left on. It was the only source of comfort, not because of what it showed, but because of what it didn't. No mirror, only a blank wall, painted white and warped by moisture. A small mercy, but the letter had still arrived, found tucked beneath the bed frame, folded precisely. No envelope, only the message, written on yellowing paper. You thought I wouldn't find you. That was a fun game. You breathe slower in this room. Your fear is quieter, but it's still beautiful. The note had been crumpled, then burned, but no smoke alarm had been triggered. There had been no battery inside the unit. Finn had checked twice. Sleep had come in fragments, each one stitched with static. The ceiling had felt closer every time his eyes opened. The sound of breathing had continued, his own but distorted, amplified, as if the air had been recorded and played back through an old speaker. Each exhale had sounded, watched. In the morning the bed had been cold, not chilled, just untouched. His body had been found curled on the floor, back against the wall, hand wrapped around the knife as if it were a child's toy. The sunlight had spilled across the carpet, but it had not warmed the room, no matter how much had entered. The corners had remained cold, too cold, like something had drained the heat overnight. Finn had begun to hear things, not voices, not words, only patterns, taps, pulses, whispers without shape, sounds that didn't belong to anything with a mouth. The motel had grown louder with silence. No guests had been seen. No other cars had moved. No footsteps above or below. Just one long hum, as though something vast and old had been lying dormant beneath the foundations, and now stirred. That night, a new item had been found. Not a note, not a photo. A toothbrush, his still wet, still warm, placed atop the pillow, though he hadn't brushed since morning. and hadn't left it there. He had stared at it for nearly an hour, then thrown it in the sink, and stared again. A knock had sounded, 2 short taps, then a scrape, low, as though something dull had been dragged across the wood. A note had been slipped under the door moments later, not folded, not clean. The paper had been damp, edges curled with condensation, written in red. "Don't forget to floss. I used yours last night. Hope that's okay." The motel phone had rung for the first time, but when it had been picked up, only breath had been heard, long measured. Then a single sentence. "The back of your neck twitches when you lie." And then click. Finn had removed the battery from the phone, cut the line, but the words had followed him into sleep, into the walls, into the sound of his own thoughts. By dawn a decision had been made. He would leave, not to another room, not to another town, but to somewhere without doors, without windows, without time. But as the bag had been packed, the curtain had moved. No breeze had blown, no fan had turned. The fabric had simply shifted, like something had brushed past from the other side, and from behind it, a shape had begun to emerge. The curtain had not been drawn aside, not by human hands, not with weight or gesture. It had simply parted like breath through steam, like smoke making room for something heavier. The shape behind it had not moved quickly, it had not lunged, it had not spoken, but it had been there, something tall, or perhaps only stretched. The fabric had touched it, and had refused to fall back. Finn had stepped backward, then again, until the back of his legs had met the motel bed. The mattress had creaked under his sudden contact. The shape had remained at the curtain, still as frost. Then it had blinked. No eyes had been seen, no face, only a momentary flutter, like light filtered through moving lashes. But it had been felt, not seen, not known, felt like cold fingers against a fevered neck. No confrontation had come, no violence. The curtain had fallen back into place. The shape had gone, but the knowledge had remained. Something had not come to harm him. It had come to observe. It had come to remind him that there were no distances left, that he was already touched. The next note had been hidden inside his shoe, pressed to the insole with a sticky reddish film. "You walk differently now. Less purpose, more twitch. I like it." Finn had not screamed. The urge had existed, but the sound had never come. Something in the room had waited for a scream, longed for it, fed on it. He had felt this, so he had starved it. He had given it silence, only silence, even as tears had clawed down his face, even as bile had crept up his throat. The motel had begun to change, subtly, not in layout, not in light, but in texture. The carpet had seemed damper, the air thicker, the corners darker. Even in daylight, the plumbing had begun to gurgle when untouched. The faucet had hissed without being turned. Whispers had started to emerge from the bathroom sink. Not words, just the shape of language, just the intention of speech. A new photo had appeared. Placed this time inside the microwave. No envelope, just the image. It had been taken from the floor, angle, low, under the bed. Finn had been shown mid-motion, tying his shoe, his hair tousled, face unaware, vulnerable. The note scrawled across the edge read, "You shouldn't lean so far forward. The neck is delicate. I was so close." That night, the dream had returned. Or perhaps it had never left. The hallway had been long, too long. The doors had breathed, slowly expanding, then contracting, each one pulsing slightly, like lungs. At the end of the corridor, a mirror had stood, but it had not shown his face, only a collection of letters, hundreds of them, shifting across glass like ants, each one open, each one bleeding red. From inside the glass, a voice had whispered, "Your spine clicks when you lie on your left side. Your cough is coming back. Shall I fix it?" He had woken up choking, the air thick with the smell of lilac and something metallic. His chest had heaved, but his limbs had not responded. For several seconds, only his eyes had moved, and in the corner, the shape had returned. Same height, same stillness, but this time, it had been closer, Not behind the curtain, not across the room, but beside the desk, 1 foot from his bag. Facing him, the curtain had never moved. The door had never opened. The window had never shattered, but it had come through. Somehow, the walls had allowed it. The air had parted. Or perhaps there had never been a wall at all, only the illusion of boundaries. In the morning, something had been placed beside his toothbrush, a contact lens. His still wet, but he hadn't worn lenses in 3 years. He had tried to leave, truly leave. Bag packed, shoes tied, door unlatched. But when the handle had turned, nothing had moved. It had not clicked. It had not yielded. The lock had been gone, as if the knob itself had forgotten how to open. And then, a breath had been felt behind him. Warm, human, directly against the back of his head. And a note had fallen, from above, from nowhere, landing softly on his shoulder. The moment you think I'm gone is the moment I'm closest. Don't turn around. The note had not been touched, only stared at, as if contact would seal something permanent, as if the weight of the ink might spread. Finn had not turned around. He had obeyed, not from fear of consequence, but from certainty of truth. Whatever had whispered, had known, not just his body, not just his habits, but his obedience. Time had become diluted. Daylight arrived without feeling. Night came without warning. Meals had stopped. The stomach had forgotten to speak. The body had moved only to prove it could. The face in the mirror had stopped aligning with memory. The expression had grown too familiar, not in a comforting way, in the way that a stranger might mimic a friend's smile, slightly off, a beat too slow, too wide. On the 9th day, or the 10th, the world had fallen silent. No cars had passed. No birds had been heard. No plumbing had stirred. Even the motel clerk had stopped existing. Finn had begun to suspect that the rest of the world had folded away, like a backdrop collapsed in a forgotten play. All that had remained was the room, and the watcher. The letters had stopped arriving on paper. Instead, they had begun to appear in objects. The condensation on the mirror, the steam in the shower, in leftover dust across the TV screen. You flinch in your sleep now. I brush your hair. You never notice. You only bite your nails when you dream of drowning. Want help with that? I opened your mouth while you slept. Your tongue twitched so delicately, so warm. The body had been watched from the inside. That was how it had begun to feel, not haunted from without, but measured from within. Every blink, every shift in temperature, every rise of breath, noticed, recorded, responded to. And then, one morning, no Finn had awakened, at least not the one who had first received the letter. Another had stood in the mirror, same body, same face, but something else had watched through the eyes. Slower movements, more confident posture, no fear in the pupils, just depth and amusement. A single final note had remained, not written in red, not written at all, just scratched into the wallpaper, above the bed, deep grooves, uneven but deliberate. You didn't survive me. You became me. Finn had left the motel 2 days later. A smile had rested lightly on his lips. The bag had been carried casually. His gait had been relaxed, measured. The motel clerk, what was left of him, had not spoken. He had only watched through blackened eyes, through a mouth too wide, through the window Finn had never opened. New tenants had arrived weeks later. Different faces, different fears, but the same curtains, the same drawer, the same toothbrush holder, and on the nightstand, waiting patiently, an envelope, off-white, unmarked, with the faintest scent of lilac. Inside, a folded page, red ink, shaky lines. You blinked 39 times in 4 minutes. That's a new record. May I come closer? The watcher never leaves. It only changes mirrors.